My name is Jason.
My name is Tom.
And this is Fear of a Black Dragon, an old school RPG podcast.
And in this episode, we're taking things literally as the Sea Queen escapes.
Our first segment is the basic crawl.
The Sea Queen Escapes is a 24-page adventure for characters of level 3, written for Dungeon Crawl Classics by Michael Curtis. The cover artist and cartographer was Doug Kovacs, and the editor Erin Blackdirge Rudell. The interior artists are Jeff Easley, Doug Kovacs again, Peter Mullen, Russ Nicholson, Stefan Poeg, and Michael Wilson. And art direction and layout was from Joseph Goodman.
The contents begin with an introduction in which we learn about a wizard, Shadanken, dedicated to researching the mysteries of the ocean. He encounters the Sea Queen and becomes friends with her, but she's been dabbling in some dark forces that eventually turn her monstrous. Shadanken can't bring himself to destroy her, so he magically imprisons her instead. Recent earthquakes have damaged her magical prison, allowing her to send out telepathic dream messages urging people to come find her, with promises of riches if they do so. Enter our adventuring party. The introductory portion also has a section about some ways that the party can get started, plus an encounter table. Now, the adventure proper is essentially 3 small dungeons, and the first of those dungeons is Shadanken's Sanctum. The big features here are the lamprey men, our evil species here, as well as a big jaded shark in a way. I love the description of the shark. The second little dungeon is the Vault of the Turtle. This is a dungeon inside a giant island-sized turtle. And here we encounter all kinds of cool things. For such a compact little dungeon, it has lots of cool monsters and things, including some doomed zombie-like sailors. And then finally, we have the Earth Prison. This is where the adventuring party will presumably free the Sea Queen and then discover that, oh, she's the baddie, and we'll have to deal with her. The module concludes with handouts A and B depicting the entrance to Shadanken's Sanctum and a mural therein, respectively. And then we have maps of the 3 dungeons and an exterior view of the vertiginous approach to the Sanctum. So let's talk about how we have used the Sea Queen Escapes in our gaming, Tom.
All right, I have run it as a one-shot twice, using, I think, BX or OSC or Blue Hope, something like that, but with more seafaring-y character classes. How about you?
I have run it over the course of several sessions, I think 3 sessions, using Dungeon World a number of years ago. So things we liked about the module, well, okay, let's just get the easy stuff out of the way. All the normal sorts of, all the normal presentation and art things that Dungeon Crawl Classics does. We always lavish praise on them, and this is no different. Thoughts?
Yep, I mean, especially, I think, in this case, the Doug Kovacs maps are, I mean, they're always good. These I found particularly easy to use. And I liked having a view of the approach to the Sanctum built into the first map. That was great. And he also does those handouts, which are amazing. So it's, you get into the first room of the Sanctum, hand this to the players, and it's just this immensely detailed view of the doorway, which is a huge gaping shark maw. No, it's the mouth of a shark. I'm pretty sure the maw is a different part of a fish. But yeah, like the big scary shark door and murals and all sorts of things to look at. And in play, that works so well. There's another room where there's an important mural with clues on it, which the players in both my games didn't really make much hay from, I'll put it that way. Right, they spent ages poring over this thing. And, you know, when someone else is doing something and your character's not that involved, you can be looking at the handout going, what does this wizard figure signify? Oh, just really good, yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Dungeon Crawl Classics maps and handouts, they are like designed to be printed out and laid in front of the players. Whenever I run Dungeon Crawl Classics, I never actually run it using DCC. I run it with other systems, but I still use the handouts and things, and it's always a delight. And I have rarely gotten a more delighted response from players than when I laid out the Turtle Dungeon map. Like the Turtle Dungeon map was just like a huge hit. Layout, formatting, just everything they do in these books is so good. I feel kind of bad because it's become like so expected, I guess, but it's worth mentioning. In terms of other sort of presentation things that maybe we haven't talked about so much before, I think DCC does a really, really good job with read aloud text. This would be box text in another adventure. Here it's just like italicized. I love the way they do their read aloud text. It's always very well-sized and tells you just enough to get exploring. It never overstays its welcome. It's just a little bit to read and kind of get everyone's get everybody in the headspace of the location and then get going. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and especially in the sometimes somewhat arch aesthetic of DCC modules, I think it's almost a way for you to, as the GM, to disclaim responsibility. When I think back to how I use these, most adventures I'll just pre-see what it says in the box text. In these, I'll often, even if I'm just summarizing what those italics say, I will permit myself to say, it says here, and I'll quote the bit from the text that is maybe too cheesy for me to say as myself, you know what I mean? Like, it gives you permission to crank up the heroic fantasy meter a bit. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's get to the substantive stuff, things we enjoyed about the module. I have just two really big overarching points, but I think some of your points are caught up in my two big overarching points.
Maybe. I think I've got one I should go with first, which is the overall tone, which is the nautical theming. Okay, so I think this is perhaps, it's still not our white whale module of the good seafaring adventure, because it's not. It's land locations that are seafaring adjacent, basically, but even so, the nautical thematic stuff in here really is good. Great. You know, lamprey men, big sharks, diving into pools, rotting edifices that smell of salt, and of course the way you summon the second dungeon, which is blowing a big old horn over the open ocean so that it's... I mean, it's mythic, it's oceanic, it's really good. Well, of course, the Earth prison is deliberately not sea-related. That's why the Sea Queen is trapped there. For me, that switch to the elemental ideas rather than just general nauticality,
right? Yeah,
it sort of ebbs a bit at that point, the fun, but like there's so much residual good feeling from the Sanctum and the Turtle Dungeon that in our games it didn't go away. Nobody got bored or anything, you know?
Yeah, I agree completely. The first two dungeons in this are solid fantasy-ass seafaring adventure stuff, and you're right, it doesn't quite achieve the white whale status of really, really good seafaring adventure like we have always talked about wanting. We'll get there someday, but we haven't found it yet. But this is really good. This is like 75% of the way there. Something that I really like about the module is the monsters. Okay, and I think this ties into what you were saying. I absolutely love the monsters in this module. In particular, I like how the module takes standard fantasy adventure game monster tropes and ideas and recontextualizes them for a mostly ocean-faring scenario. You have the lamprey men, which seem like your sort of stand-ins for orcs and things like that. I should mention here that they also have a really fantastic illustration on the page.
I think that might be the best illustration in the adventure, actually.
It's really good, yeah. We have like the idea of the roper trap monster, but in this case it's a sea anemone. I think the jellyfish with the treasure chest inside of it is such a great play on the gelatinous cube. You know, this idea of the gelatinous cube having like treasures in it, you know, that you can see. Oh, the zombie thieves that are covered in barnacles and swarms of crabs. So many good monsters. They have this familiarity to them because in a winking way, they lean into like classic fantasy adventure tropes, but they have this nautical theming to them, and I think it works really well.
It does. I mean, especially the lamprey men. It's the perfectly circular mouths that does it, right?
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
So they're so weird. I mean, even in real life, lampreys are weird, and actually, that pushes it so far into mild horror fantasy that so my two runs, one was for a kind of normal group of adults aged, 20-something to, I guess, their 40s. The second one was for smaller kids. I felt like I had to cut mentioning anything about the mouths because they would freak them out. I also had the Sea Queen turn out to be nice. They rescued her. It was fine.
Jeez.
I wasn't going to do it from the beginning, but sometimes you can sense the atmosphere with kids, and you're like, if she turns out to be the villain, they're going to be a bit upset about this, and I bet, let's just keep it on an even keel. So yeah, but those lamprey men, man, they're something else, and they inhabit. They're sort of the theme monster of the whole of the Sanctum section. There's a shark in the basement, but basically the lamprey men are the main antagonists there.
Sure.
And their dwelling, the way it's sort of built into this old tower, using the bathtub as a egg pod depository area. Yeah, really atmospheric and just good.
Yeah, it's solid. A little note about the lamprey men and the shark. I love the little social dynamic between these two monsters, the way it's described in the module, because essentially the way it's described in the module is the shark used to attack the lamprey men. The shark used to attack them and used to give them trouble, but the lamprey men fought it to a standstill so often, and it bears the scars of those battles, that it just like doesn't bother anymore. Like it just like leaves the lampreyman kind of to be, and it kind of affects like the way the characters interact with the shark as well. I just like the idea of this like otherwise dumb creature being given this personality related to the history of its existence there, you know?
Yeah, that's good.
Kind of great.
Yeah.
Like cryptid mythology sort of, you know, it's kind of got that same vibe, you know, like the legendary shark that has, you know, has seen so many battles and now it just hangs out there. I just like that. Like I imagine the tales of gigantic catfish that people have tried to catch so often, you know, or whatever. You know, so now it's patched
the
in
general,
legend, you know?
or whatever. Yeah, was it in The Simpsons?
Oh yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, I like that it's a hammerhead shark, by the way, because I think it's a great choice because it's the most visually distinctive.
Mm-hmm.
Like all other sharks, even the great white, you'd have to have a bit where the players go, which one is that? Is that the one with the with that kind of?
And it's just like sizes
hammerhead
that distinguish them,
exactly.
basically, right?
Hammerhead, everyone's right there with it.
Oh, yeah,
and of course, if anyone is, I believe the hammerhead is the one that people always trot out the fact that, well, you know, hammerheads don't actually attack people. So that's a good bit of false security for you.
Segueing from the lampreyman thing, another sort of major thing I really love about the Sea Queen Escapes is I think this module does a really, really good job of building suspense, but also playing with character expectations. They sort of work hand in hand. When I ran this, I recall the moment where the party finds this large fish with the giant lamprey bite marks out of it. Okay. Like they're like these circular bite marks. And I remember the party being very intrigued by that and very scared of that. Like that's not, it was like, oh, there's something here and it leaves bite marks like this. And now I'm on guard. It was a great little moment. I think that the hints that are dropped like throughout the module about the Sea Queen's true nature do a great job of keeping players a little bit on the back foot and building up the suspense to the final encounter with the Sea Queen. The fact that the module does this thing where it puts treasures just out of reach. Yeah. I like it when modules do this. When they put the treasure, like you can see it, it's there, but you have to put your hands up in a disgusting jellyfish thing, or you have to like scale up to the top of a pile of stuff to get to, you know, get past the sea anemone. Like you can kind of see it there. It's just a little bit out of reach. I know you didn't love it. It was not my favorite part either. But the third dungeon, which is mostly just a bunch of tar.
Yeah, no, it is a good dungeon. It's just not.
It's a good dungeon.
Like, in your mind's eye, it's not as visually compelling as the rest of it. Yeah.
One thing I did like about it though is that the fact that so much of it is tar really, really messes with standard dungeon crawling procedure, because now suddenly torches are a problem.
Torches are a big problem, yeah.
Torches are a huge problem. This sort of monster you fight there, that living tar monster, it sort of presents itself like a maybe slightly more humanoid, like pudding monster, right? And, you know, everybody knows how you handle that. You set them on fire. But if you set this one on fire, it's more dangerous.
Because it's attacking you and it's on fire.
Yeah, it's a flaming, living pudding monster. So the module does such a good job of both building suspense and also pulling the rug out from under the players, but in a way that feels fair. And I really like that. It's well constructed. Anything else you want to say that you liked about it?
Oh, sure. Well, firstly, I'd like to echo the thing about suspense. Even my beloved handout A is just a picture of suspense. Here's the door. It's a big mouth. You're going to go in? And from that moment on, everything, there's this sort of apprehension about it. I mean, if you think about the second dungeon, climbing up the back of a turtle and going inside the shell, that's scary by itself as well. And of course, as you say, the clues that things are, and just the weirdness of the tar-filled dungeon, which is a sort of straight-edged block of basalt, I think, that's been turned into this prison, just jutting out of the sea. It's really good stuff. I also would like to mention the recurring dream intro. I think in a recent episode we talked about using dreams' importance as plot hooks, and it works really well here.
It does, yeah.
Especially, I think, for one-shots where you often need a really nice hook in that immediately engages people into why we're doing this adventure. Right. And in this case, I was able to go, which one of you has been dreaming of an imprisoned princess and promised to save her? And then, everyone looks around the table. Someone goes, me, I guess. And then you just follow up with, and why are you going along with this to the others? And then, there you go. But also, of course, it is spooky. Following dreams is an odd thing to do.
It's a weird thing to do.
Yeah.
It's an unreliable narrator. The dream is an unreliable narrator, right? You don't know if you're getting all the information you need, and it's just weird.
Yeah, for sure. And then just as a more specific thing, I want to say about the Sanctum again, to describe it a bit more. It's a great fight scene in the sort of 90s Hong Kong martial arts movie style. It's got multiple levels, the sort of balconies that look out onto each other, because it's kind of a hollowed out tower, basically, with water at the bottom.
Yeah.
And you can hop across platforms that are turtle shells to get from one side to the other. You can take cover in places. I mean, you could run a feng shui game, would have a really great fight sequence in this, just in the Sanctum.
Right.
And in fact, the whole adventure follows the old 3 fight scenes in interesting locations with a tiny sliver of connective plot between them, model that was advocated in Feng Shui First Edition. You know, if you wanted to just steal one map and location from this, I think it's almost worth the price of admission just for that one bit at the beginning, which is odd because normally the last location is the showstopper, but here it starts really high and then the other bits are good but don't quite live up to the Sanctum, I think. But, you know,
I
guess
like
sometimes
the Turtle
happens.
Dungeon a lot.
Yeah.
I think the Turtle Dungeon is really good. All right, well, questions we had about the module. I have just one, so I'll go ahead and do it now. Did your players figure out the Sea Queen as evil before releasing her? The group that had an evil Sea Queen?
Well, yes and no. I think they were having qualms. And, you know, you only need 3 people. One person who's convinced she's evil, one who's pretty sure she's not, and one that's in between, and that's what we had. And then the one who was fairly sure she was good was just like, well, what if she is good and we don't release her? And then he released her.
Yeah.
So, done.
That feels like the right result.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want them to be sort of at that. Something bad's probably going to happen. But actually, they got really far into walking the Queen and her servants out of the prison and escorting them to a boat before the attack was sprung, basically.
Yeah.
They fell for the subsequent deception once she was free, basically.
Right.
So, there's a magical curse that you can contract in the Turtle Dungeon called the Sea Change, in which people basically swap bodies. Did you use that? Because I didn't really have time. It feels to me like you need a couple of sessions at least.
I cut it because it was like, this wasn't like an ongoing part of a bigger campaign. It was just kind of like a little short series I was doing with these players. And you're right, that sea curse thing that's a long term.
Yeah, and it feels a bit like an idea from a different game as well. Actually, I once ran a sort of party LARP in a castle where the key thing was this alien going around disguised as a human.
Yeah.
And if the alien grabbed you, you had to swap character sheets. And then, so the climactic scene of the LARP was basically gathering in the drawing room and someone going, all right, this is confusing. On the count of 3, everybody point to what they think their body should be. Yeah, that's a good scene. So but that I think is an entire different adventure that you should probably run another time. For me, it doesn't quite fit here, but it is fun. Yeah. I don't know. Should it bother me less that Lone 8 isn't actually an 8, which is an island in a river, not in the sea? Yes.
Probably, yeah.
And then another real gimme question. What is the glaring thing missing from this module? This is a trick question because it's too obvious. A ship battle.
There's no ship battle. Yeah,
there's no ship battle.
It even looks like a ship battle on the cover of the module. And there's no ship battle. Right? I remember I grabbed it for that reason. I remember thinking, where the hell's the ship battle? Yeah.
Yeah. But fortunately, we both came to the exact same very easy solution.
We did, yeah. We just had a ship battle. Yeah.
You just have her grow much bigger than it's described in the text until she's at vehicle scale. And then you have an awesome battle against a big monster lady.
Yeah.
With like harpooniers. Yep. What is that? Anyway, someone with a big spear diving off the prow of the ship into...
Yep. That's what happened in ours. Yeah. I made her gigantic, and then we had a big harpooning thing, and it was great.
I don't get how they missed this. It seems such a gimme.
It does seem like a weird omission. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Let's go to the chain lightning round. Tom.
As the Sea Queen battles the party, she ridicules them for releasing her, telling them the truth about her imprisonment and mocking them for negating all of Shadanken's efforts to save her.
I like this little description of one of the vaults. The interior of the vault is dimly lit by patches of phosphorescent sea slimes that cling to the walls and ceiling. The floor is covered by a layer of silt, and harmless animal life is encountered frequently throughout. Fish flop about on the ground, crabs scuttle down hallways, and barnacles and seaweed cling to exposed surfaces. The entire complex smells of the deep.
I think this next passage is from a very nearby location to that one. The floor is covered by sandy silt, and the odour of the sea is almost overpowering. Faintly, you hear the slow pounding of a massive heartbeat below your feet, reminding you that this is no simple vault carved from motionless stone. This area is empty.
I like this description of the horn that you use to summon the turtle. Inside the clam is the horn of Tudinus, a coiled trumpet fashioned from mother of pearl and adorned with gemstones worth 2,500 GP. Around the horn's bell is written in archaic script, "Sound me over waters deep to raise the treasures that you seek." That's some fantasy shit right there. I love it.
Yeah, I like how it almost rhymes. Okay, and we've mentioned the grumpy shark. This is how it is introduced. If the PCs observe the water's surface for more than a minute, they notice a large grey dorsal fin break the surface and cut across the lagoon like a knife before submerging. This is the lagoon's guardian, a hammerhead shark of considerable size. And I'd like to just note that in both my games, they did not observe for a minute before diving into that water.
I like this description of the Lampremen nursery. This chamber was once a bath. The natural stone walls are decorated with mosaics depicting sea creatures cavorting in the ocean depths. 2 large tiled basins are sunk into the floor. Once filled with scented waters, these tubs now hold seawater and large clumps of glistening yellow and black eggs the size of grapes. Several strange eel-human hybrids brandishing harpoons move to bar your entry into the room. Let's go to the expert delve. It's the expert delve, continuing our little series of adventuring environments. We are going to be talking about coastal places, coastal communities, coastal geographies, and essentially the way we've approached this, sort of accidentally, but this is how it ended up. Tom is going to be talking a lot about the geography of coastal locations and how that can affect the adventure. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about people, coastal peoples, but we're also going to be both talking a lot about our past, places we've lived. This is a theme whenever we do an ocean faring module. We reminisce, we ruminate.
Yeah, although it's quite present for me. If I look out of my window, I can see the sea from here. So technically, I am part of a coastal community.
I live in Lubbock, Texas, which is there's literally no body of water anywhere around here. Coastal communities, coastal places. Let's start with the geography stuff. So kick us off, Tom. Let's go.
I think I first started thinking about this because, of course, the module, The Sea Queen Escapes, contains various places that are affected by water levels, or in the case of the tar-flooded dungeon, as was just fluid levels, rising and falling and changing. And that is something that all coastal areas, but settlements and communities adapt to or make use of, is the way that the geography is always going to be shifting, like whether that's because of the rising and falling tide, or thanks a bunch, global warming, just rising water levels in general. It's also worth remembering that high and low tides aren't always the same. There is a highest tide of the year and a lowest, basically. It's sort of a cycle. It's all something to do with the moon. The point is that there are sort of several rotating amounts of water available at different times. And that is noticeable sometimes. So I sometimes get the Guide ferry across the harbour to get to my house if I'm on a certain area of town. And you can tell when you get off and go up the little ferry pier where the tide is, because sometimes the little gangplank you walk across to the land is perfectly flat at high tide,
right?
And other times it's incredibly steep, and if you're carrying heavy shopping, it's a bit of a hassle because the jetty is, it's a pontoon, so it's lower than it would be, so you're climbing up to the land instead. That's in fantasy exploration terms, the interesting things then are what gets revealed at low tide or hidden at high tide. So caverns, or sometimes just things that are attached to the shore, like, you have bits of chains or things that were covered in water before are now revealed, or perhaps if you're in a boat and the tide is high, you can now reach things you couldn't reach before. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning, though, is slowness. This might be more of a community thing. Even before people talked about coastal erosion in general, it's a known thing that gradual wearing away happens at the edge of the sea. Salt water, rust, and cliffs collapsing, and houses in the east of England disappearing into the sea. At the mouth of the Thames, famously, there is a bomb-laden wreck still sitting fairly shallowly that you have to avoid when you go in and out of it. And they can't move it because it's got too many bombs on it.
Oh my, yeah.
I think it's at Gravesend, which is an ironic name for the town that's closest to it. And the inhabitants there have historically been a bit upset about the fact that not that much is being done to get rid of this thing. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the sort of placid, slow element of that. But of course, tides and things being hidden or revealed have been used in more fun, adventure-y ways historically.
Yeah.
You get mudlarks in the, Untitled rivers, your chirpy cockney street urchin type, but instead of going up chimneys, these kids are wading around in the mud, picking up valuable things that got dropped off the side of ships while the water's out, and then they clamber back up until it all gets covered again. All this kind of thing is to do with, I think, opportunism. There's also, you get rum runners in Cornwall and the east of England who would use low and high tides to slip past blockades because they were able to take shallow draft vessels and things. So I think there's a vein of roguishness that seems to go with coastal settlements. So how does that tie in actually to your thoughts about coastal living?
I love the idea of tides. I love the idea of erosion. And I was going to put this as a companion adventure, but I decided not to. But I love that part in Deep Carbon Observatory where we see the entrance to the subterranean portion of that dungeon is in the bottom of a dried out lake. Or it's not dried out, it's just recently emptied, I should say.
Yeah, the dam got broken.
The dam broke, yeah. It's almost like this alien environment because it's the bottom of this body of water, but there's no water. It's all the things flopping around, all the things you see, all the things you find. I love that idea of the reveal. I think when it comes to tides and even erosion, there are some terrific thematic things you can do with that. The idea of the tides revealing things or covering things, that can be something you can work into your adventure thematically. What is revealed about these people? What is revealed about this place when the tides go in or go out? Or maybe it's not literally connected to the tides, but it's just this idea of revelation. And I think that's why coastal communities are they're great grist for the mill when it comes to paranoid, supernatural, xenophobic communities. You can take that angle with it. Think Innsmouth. I think the tides have a lot to do with that thematically. And erosion. There's some interesting things you can do there as well with this idea of a community that is losing its traditions or losing the way it used to be and how new industry and new people are exploiting it and taking over. So I like them in the sense of here's what they can reveal. Here's the physical way you can make the adventure happen, but I also like it in a thematic way too. And I think there's a lot of really strong stuff there to do with it.
Actually, the theme of slow decline is a classic one, the dying fishing community and so on. If you think about Innsmouth, which one? Is it Escape from Innsmouth is the Call of Cthulhu scenario? And of course, that is a theme that appears in lots of non-geek literature as well. Yeah, this idea of the existing livelihood slipping away and someone doing something desperate to try and bring it back. And that's so compelling as well, because you could have your characters on both sides of that argument, couldn't you? And that's actually even in things like anything that's to do with primary industry, it feels like, walking tall. There's always one person in the village who has the village's best interests in mind, but they want to build a mega casino to solve the problem, and someone else thinks that's about it. Your coastal communities are often particularly affected by that, yeah.
Well, that's a pretty good segue into generally what I want to talk about today, which is in my life, I've lived in places where I've lived both inland and on the coast. In North Carolina, for example, when I was younger. I've also, when I was younger, in my early 20s, I spent some time in Mexico as well. Not a long amount of time, but I traveled around. And the thing that in both cases that sticks with me is that the coastal communities, they're distinctly different from the communities inland. Now, obviously, every local community is going to have its own culture and its own traditions and things, but it feels particularly pronounced on the coast. And I think that in the context of a fantasy game especially, there's a lot of space there to really heighten those differences, right? And to really make them stand out so that the coastal community does stand out in your campaign. I think it's a total waste to have a little side adventure or a little section of the campaign that takes place in a coastal community and not explore those differences. I think those differences are a major, major part of what you're going to be doing, or they should be at least. And so a few things that come to mind. A lot of daily life, especially around fishing communities, revolves around the catch, whatever was brought in that day. And you'll discover that there's this very interconnected social and financial ecosystem that revolves around the fishermen going out and the fishermen bringing back fish. And it touches every part of the community life. And that's a really interesting aspect of coastal life, especially if we're talking a fantasy community, which is where we have kind of low technological concerns. This is not something I have any experience with, but I've done a lot of reading on it. In whaling communities, for example, or deep sea fishing communities, even today, you're going to have a kind of a similar phenomenon to what we talked about last time when we were talking about war, where members of the community, and in the real world it's mostly men, but in the fantasy world it can be anything, but where members of the community are just not there for large swathes of time, right? They're gone. And the people that are left behind have to kind of get on without them for months at a time. In the case of a whaling ship, it could be for like a year at a time or more. That's an interesting aspect of the culture of a coastal community place, especially a whaling or deep sea fishing community, to keep in mind.
That is interesting. Yeah, that's, of course, there is this sort of division of labor within the community, and that's a division of time, because actually, if I think about it, obviously when it's a long range expedition, like a whaling ship, they're gone and they don't come back for months and months. But even when it's a daily catch system at work, when I lived on Lamb Island and had to catch the boat to work in the morning, so I'd be going out, I'd be catching, I guess, the 7 a.m., 7:15 ferry. Can't remember how long it used to take. But the catch comes in early in the morning. All the people who are going to buy it and ship it and pack it in ice or whatever go down to the quay, normally in Aberdeen rather than Lama. That's not an important distinction, except for the Hong Kong listeners. But the point is that when I was on my way walking to the ferry pier, the guys who'd done the actual fishing, they were already done for the day. I would walk past them. They were at an outside table at the cafe. That table was already full of empty lager cans. Right. Because they were done, right?
Yeah, they're done for the day. Yeah,
exactly. And everyone else is sort of has these interlocking cycles where maybe they meet those guys for, I don't know, an hour at the tail end of the day.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody, I guess, syncs up maybe in the evening when everyone's awake.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think if you were to wander into your fantasy fishing village and someone is in the block of workers that's away on boats right now, you just can't see them. They're at sea. You have to wait for them to come back. And then someone else who's on the fish packing side of things, they're not available at a different time. And I don't know how fascinating timetables are, but certainly in terms of like messing around with when you have access to people is always kind of a fun thing to at least note, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and if you consider a whaling community, it's just like times 10.
Yeah.
Like you just take that idea and you just magnify it in a huge way, in a way that is where the stakes are so much higher too. My favorite book of all time is that Nathaniel Philbrick book, In the Heart of the Sea. And one of the like major things that's going on in that book is we get to see like the people sort of left behind and the incredible stakes that are involved when it comes to when the whalers get back and what circumstances are they going to be in when they get back, right? It just has such a huge impact on the community. And there's just a lot of like really interesting places to explore there. Another major thing in a fantasy context is your gods are going to be really different in the coastal community. This is one of those ways that you can make these kinds of settings feel very, very different from what the characters normally interact with the other standard Mick Europe fantasy campaign. We have different gods. These differences in gods mostly come from the fact that coastal communities have different concerns from communities that are a little bit more inland. A common trope is that these gods are older, that they're more alien, that they are more monstrous or more animal-like, and not Catholicism with the serial numbers filed off type religion. And that's another like interesting way you can kind of play with the coastal community and the coastal culture in a fantasy context to really make things stand apart.
Yeah, and even when they're existing within the prevailing religious paradigm, the concerns of those communities are going to be, well, again, like every community is different. There are different churches with different patron saints in the real world in different places, but the fishing communities or the boat people have more specific interests, you know, Mary Star of the Sea rather than
right.
Our Lady of Sorrows, for example. Yeah,
precisely. And in the fantasy context, a thing that happens often that I love is that even like when the coastal religion is under the umbrella of the prevailing religion of the kingdom or whatever, they tend to have a slightly more pagan approach to their ritual. Often their saints are repurposed pagan gods or like repurposed monstrous entities. You know, I love mystery villages. I love mystery towns and like a coastal village. This is a way you can really add that mystery element.
This is for some reason reminded me as well. I don't know if it's actually anthropologically true. Someone else will have to run the numbers on this and do a longitudinal study for me. But there's certainly a trope that I think coastal peoples are more fatalistic. I might just be thinking of the Portuguese, but there's this sort of idea that they sort of grimly accept whatever it is that comes out, whether the whalers come back laden with meat and blubber or whether it's a failure. And that's certainly a theme to look at. Although I guess maybe don't do it in every coastal village you end up at, or it would become a bit dull. But yeah,
even in like real world myth, ocean gods, they're so chaotic and unpredictable, right?
Implacable as well, though. Yeah,
and so they accept a certain amount of chaos and unpredictableness in their day-to-day life. So I guess the last thing I want to talk about is I got thinking of fun tropes to play with in the coastal adventure.
Yep.
These are tropes that come from movies and TV shows, even other games, to be honest, that are not standard fantasy adventure games. And you can take these tropes, and I think like in exploring these tropes, we get to see a lot of like what makes the coastal adventure fun, or what can make it fun, possibly. So a few things. Going back to the top of our conversation here, gods and goddesses specifically related to the moon and tides, I think is a big one. For a more horror approach, humans interbreeding with fishmen is a big one, especially in Lovecraftian type stuff, mythos stuff, but you can do that in your fantasy games as well. Religious and funeral ceremonies that involve paddling out to sea. You can get a lot of like interesting visuals and stuff going on there, and I have something in my companion adventures I want to talk about related to that. Lighthouse murders.
Yeah, a lot of lighthouse keepers get murdered, don't they?
Yeah, lighthouse murders, great grist for the adventure mill. The fisherman brought back something unusual, really, really good jumping off point.
Yeah.
Or alternatively, something unusual washes ashore. Oh, here's something maybe a little more, this may not be as exciting in the fantasy game context, but I don't know. I could make a fun thing out of it. Insurance disputes related to whaling communities, and or disputes about shares if it's more of a pirate type thing. That could be a great kickoff for an adventure.
Oh yeah, it's certainly a good kickoff to a fight down the docks with some belaying pins and things in hand. Yeah.
A vessel that never returned.
Classic.
Or a vessel that was missing for a long time suddenly returns. That's a good one.
Yeah.
And finally, this is really hyper specific, but gosh, it's such a good moment if you pull it off. A group of fishermen take their little rowboats out at night with their lanterns to perform dark rituals in the ocean. I love this as a point of mystery. I use it in my game Brindlewood Bay. It adds this element of mystery and occult activity and kind of wraps it up with ocean stuff. And I think it's really good little detail to throw in if you have like an occult kind of situation.
Oh yeah,
going on.
That's great. Actually, here in Hong Kong, there's a whole thing where the professional fishermen have dragon boat races that mostly people don't get invited to, like actually out in the sea.
Yeah.
And it's like a whole thing amongst the amateur community. Like, oh, our team got invited to go to one of these fishermen sea races. And it's like, I don't think they do it in the dead of night. That would be a bit difficult to arrange. But the fact that it's sort of hidden, but not, it's just hidden by being far away. I think that's what makes it so compelling, right?
It's intriguing. It's intriguing. Anything else we want to say about coastal gaming?
Yeah, I would add sort of one thing, which is that, as you know, I am a fan of and sometime advocate for slow gaming.
Yes.
As in games that are maybe not relaxed, but that feel more languorous than the action-packed things that people tend to aim for. And I think coastal communities, with their long-term view of things and adaptation to gradual change or the cycle of the years, are particularly well suited to this. One thing that sort of recurs in tales of the Age of Sail, particularly things like the True History of the Pirates, is waiting days for the tide to lift your ship off a sandbar that you got grounded on. You know, things sometimes take really just ages. Having to wait that long is where, you know, your overloaded encounter dice with clues and warning signs, as well as the actual monsters, really come into their own in OSR. But also there's just a great chance to say, so while you're all stuck here on this sandbar, what do you say to each other, you know?
Yeah.
And equally, you know, while you're waiting for the ship to come back, it's going to be hours. What do you do? These really quiet moments. I think we talked about that a bit when we discussed seafaring in the Saltmarsh episode, right? There are these long, quiet stretches where you're just by yourself or you're with someone who's in your crew or community. And I think it's really important it's not important, it's just a game, but I think it can be really great to embrace these moments where nothing is happening and just see how your characters react, because, I don't know, it's more fun later when they get into a gunfight down at the docks with the insurance guys about the...
Yeah, exactly.
So,
I agree completely. With that said, let's go to the next segment. Our next segment is the companion adventures. I have a million RPG things. I even have RPG things that aren't listed here. So
yeah, I also kept thinking of more things while we were talking.
Because while the OSR has not sorted out proper seafaring adventures yet that we know of, story games have. So
yep, exactly. Do you want to start actually with your RPG treasure trove?
I will. Yeah. So I've got a million things that are actually published by us at the Gauntlet. So in Trophy Dark, in the official Trophy Dark book, the actual book, one of the incursions is called Gift of the Sea. It's by Gabriel Robinson. This one was actually one of the contest winners when we ran the Trophy Dark contest a couple years ago. And I love this incursion so much because Gabriel really nails this idea that I was talking about earlier, which is the idea that coastal communities have a different approach to religion and a different approach to ceremony. And the ways that those differences can play out is a terrific way of distinguishing the setting from the rest of the campaign. And so it's a lovely incursion, has so much good nautical imagery. I really recommend Gift of the Sea in the Trophy Dark book. I also am going to throw a shout out to my games, Brindlewood Bay and The Between. Brindlewood Bay, of course, is set in a coastal community and
set
has
in a
lots
bay,
of,
yeah.
Set in a bay, yeah, exactly, right. It deals with a lot of these things that I talked about earlier. The Between actually has lots of stuff. It's loaded with stuff about the Thames. Mudlarking, for example, comes up. Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff related to that. So I hadn't thought about that until you started talking about mudlarking. So shout out there. And then another trophy thing. This is not something we published, but one of the Trophy Gold contest winners was Sea of Dust by Brian Bin. Sea of Dust is fantastic because what it is it's a coastal community of goblins. We get to see goblins in this completely different context that we don't normally get to see goblins. And these are goblins that harvest scallops and that deal with seaweed and have like various folk crafts that they do. So that's the first raft of my RPG suggestions. I have just like one more. I'll go ahead and do it now.
Go on, yeah.
The next thing I want to talk about is it's a standalone game by Storybrewers Role Playing called Alas for the Awful Sea. I love Alas for the Awful Sea. It's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, but it's a little different from other PBTA games in that it's this very, very contained experience. It's meant to be played over just a few sessions, and the characters don't really advance or anything. But basically, you play people investigating this mystery in this, I think it's a whaling town. It's a coastal community in any case.
It's Scotland, isn't it? The Hebrides, I think, maybe?
Yeah. I believe that's right, yeah. And it takes place in this really particular time in British history and with all these really particular circumstances. It does such a good job of exploring a community, particularly this coastal community, and exploring their traditions and their prejudices and their secrets. I won't spoil it, but there's like a big supernatural twist involved as well. Just a really, really great game. It's worth a few sessions of your time for sure. What do you got, Tom?
All right, well, sticking to RPGs, and actually, while we're plugging our own stuff, I guess I should mention my game, Melandros, which is
yes.
a slow gaming experience set in Rio de Janeiro, and a couple of the character types you can play are fishermen or stevedores, and anything else related to that? It depends how you play it, I guess.
Lots of stevedores, so yeah.
Yeah. I also want to mention one of the Thousand Islands zines by Zidux Yu and Munkau, which is called Corvu, Korvu, and this is it's a very magical fantasy setting where there are two versions of the same place. One is the drowned one, when it's sort of undersea kingdom, and the other is the dry. So for half of the year, the ocean just disappears, and you're on the seafloor, and it's all open to the air. It's quite fantastic. Also, game-related but not RPGs, there is a board game that I got sent for Christmas a year or two ago called Pirates of Penryn. That's Penryn.
I don't know that one.
No, I think it's made by a local games company in Cornwall, because it's all about Cornish rum runners in the, I'm going to say 18th century. And what's interesting here, it's sort of a family game. It's got like a funny bit with a local sea monster that sort of does random stuff to your ships, but actually, your ships don't move. They're on the edge of the board. You're kind of rowing or sailing in your smuggled rum barrels to different towns in little cutters. And each turn, the tide advances. So at some points, certain squares or even an entire town are inaccessible by boat, and sometimes you can sail. Yeah. And it would actually be a pretty good mini game for an RPG scenario. I'm trying to think of how to use it. It has a lovely little cloth map that covers the bay and all that kind of stuff. So if you can find a copy, I think it's quite fun. Do you have anything else to mention here?
I just have a TV show. I was going to recommend Outer Banks, which is a TV show on Netflix. There's 2 seasons of it now. So the Outer Banks is a show that takes place in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and it's essentially YA Goonies, basically.
Yeah,
what it is,
it's a lot like the Goonies, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's these young people, beautiful, sweaty young people.
They're quite sweaty, that's true.
They're very sweaty, yeah. There's a high amount of sweat in this show. Beautiful, sweaty young people searching for treasure and living their lives in the Outer Banks. And also making incredibly stupid decisions.
Yes,
but
yeah.
still, but being forgiven and getting past it because they're idealistic, young, sweaty, beautiful people. Despite how dumb they are, they get by. Great show. I love it. What I like about it, the reason why I'm recommending it, is because it does a really good job of showing a coastal community, for one thing. This is actually on an island. But also, it kind of deals with class differences in a way that I find is interesting. So, it might maybe
and and how people have this facility with boats and diving gear and stuff. That because of where they live. By the way, I love that you love this. It's I also enjoy watching Outer Banks, which sometimes causes friction with my wife, who on occasion has limited patience for shows about teenagers making bad decisions, whereas I, on the other hand, have emceed a lot of Monster Hearts. So it's a bit of a point of contention. But I quite enjoy it. But don't expect sensible plotting, especially in the second season. But
yeah, it's a very silly show, and like so much American TV show, it's about teenagers, but they're like 30-year-old teenagers, right? Like it's like there are no teenagers like this. These are like it's very one of those kind of shows. Yeah, so those are all my recommendations. What else do you have?
Okay, I've got a few more bits and pieces. The film The Secret of Roan Inish, which is from the 90s, not sure when, but that's set on, near the island of the title, Roan Inish, which means the Isle of Seals. The title of the film spells it in some weird non-Irish way. It's about this declining coastal community on the west coast of Ireland, and this girl is sent to live with her grandparents. And there's a whole thing about that Selkies are rumoured to live near the Seal Island, and there's a family legend that her younger brother was taken away when he was a baby. And if I say any more than that, I think it's going to be spoilers. So just, it's a really beautiful film, and you should see it. So also, apart from that, I would like to mention The Drowned World by J.G. Ballard, which is a post-apocalyptic novel. It's a little bit slow, and it's set in this flooded, I think, is it London specifically? Yeah. There's a lot of stuff there about draining water levels and how things are transformed by being in contact with water and going soft and mushy. And it has some good underwater exploration bits in it as well. It's I was about to say it's quite fun. It's not fun because it's a J.G. Ballard novel, but, I liked it. And finally, I'd like to mention, actually, you were talking about coastal religious practices. I'd like to mention there's a sort of, hard to explain, a kind of dance stroke performance called the Puxada de Rede in Brazil that takes place on the coast, and it's usually amongst black fishing communities. It's sort of a narrative singing and dancing thing that shows a fishing expedition going out to sea, and the song is about things like I'm trying to translate lyrics in my head now. What offering should I bring to Dona Janinha, who's the sort of represents Iemanjá, the sea goddess within Candomblé and related Afro-Brazilian religions. And then, by the end of the song, they're singing about having returned and naming people who haven't returned from the sea and saying, why haven't they come back? And the response is, I don't know. And it's all done with a fishing net as kind of the prop and hauling ropes out of the sea. And it was traditionally performed on the beach and in the water and kind of bringing boats up out of it. So, try and YouTube that if you can. It's spelled Puxada space DE space REDE. If I can find a link, I guess I'll stick it on Twitter. But Puxada de Rede, it's very haunting and expresses both the sort of melancholy and fatalism of this kind of dangerous coastal living, because it's all about how people are not coming back, but there's that optimism at the start because they're trying to find some way that they can make themselves safer, because ultimately they have to go out to sea. They don't really have a choice about that.
Right.
So, there we go. That's my lot, I think. Yeah,
I love that. That's awesome. Well, listeners, that's our show. Fear of a Black Dragon is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find The Gauntlet on Twitter at GauntletRPG. We have a website. It's gauntlet-rpg.com. And we have a Patreon. If you'd like to support Fear of a Black Dragon and see it keep going, you can do so at patreon.com/gauntlet. Tom, thank you so much.
Jason, thank you. Thanks also to our epipelagic editor, Rich Jolly Rogers. And thank you, listeners, for listening.
Wow.
Goodbye.
Bye, listeners. Take care.
The next Gauntlet Community Open Gaming will be happening the weekend of October 14th through the 17th of 2021. GCOG is the Gauntlet Gaming Community's free online tabletop RPG convention. Over the weekend, we'll be offering more than 24 sessions with games like Brindlewood Bay, Monster of the Week, Hearts of Wulin, Star Wars Swoop Gangs, and more. All sessions are run with a set of safety tools and follow the Gauntlet Code of Conduct. Registration opens Monday, September 20th at 12 o'clock noon U.S. Eastern Time. We created the con to help new players get used to online play, showcase indie games, and introduce folks to our community. If you want to check out the event listings, go to bit.ly/GCOG events, all smushed together. For more detail on registration and procedures, go to bit.ly/gauntlet-community. We hope we'll see you there.